Thank you for staying with us, listeners. We are back after that short break with another really interesting story to bring to you. A report was published earlier this week about the territory of Somaliland, which was recently recognized by Israel, offering the U.S. access to minerals as it pushes for further recognition. And to discuss this, we are joined by our guest, Asha Ali, who is a cultural producer, curator, and researcher from Somalia, currently based in Exeter in wonderful Southwestistan. Assalamu alaikum, Asha. How are you doing?
Wa alaikum salam. Alhamdulillah, I'm well. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, very good. Jum'ah Mubarak. Hope Ramadan's been going well with you.
Yes, Alhamdulillah, same to you.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Asha, in just very quickly, can you summarize for us the dynamics and the sequence of events that led to the region known as Somaliland unilaterally declaring its independence from Somalia in 1991? I mean, before we kind of go more deeply into this question of trading off minerals for recognition, I think it's really important for our listeners to have a broader understanding of why does this territory exist with some level of, sovereignty. And I would like for you to provide that.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I'll give a brief summary. I'll jump through different historical points to attempt to summarize the sequence of events. On the 21st of October 1969, there was a military takeover led by the Somali National Army officer of the Supreme Revolutionary Council under General Siad Barre. And then less than 10 years later, in 1977, at the peak of pan-Somali nationalism, there was the Ogadennian War, also known as the Etho-Somalian War. While the war was short, it lasted less than a year. The Somali Democratic Republic lost more than the war and the reclaiming of their land from Ethiopia. It also lost an important ally, including Cuba, who supplied soldiers to Ethiopia. This meant that Siad Barre's government was basically bankrupt, with no support from his closest ally. Barre's government became politically unstable, which led to numerous repressions, further relying on brutal force to stay in power. And then from 1981 to May 1991, the Somali national movement fought what is called a war of independence to create an independent republic in North Somalia, which is now known as Somaliland, challenging Barre's other authoritarian government. And in May 18th, 1991, they declared themselves as an autonomous state within the borders of the former British Somaliland. Several of those regions that fell within that border opposed secession. So that is kind of like a brief summary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Asha. And I think that's a really good kind of rooting of the argument. And of course, there is also the narrative that the emergence of Somaliland also comes from this argument that the Ishaq, or a historically oppressed group by the central Somali state and Siad Barre's government. And so, what would you say to that sort of argument and that sort of rooting of support for Somaliland independence?
Well, I think firstly we should acknowledge that the violence committed against the Isaac clan after the Ogaden War, that there was a violence committed against the Isaac clan after the Ogaden War, which culminated in what is often described as a genocide, including the bombing of Hargeisa and Bur'ab. However, what is often overlooked is that Siad Barre's regime also targeted other clans in those years, including collective punishment of the Mujartan clan, of the Hawiya clan, the Ogadens, and the land seizure of the Rahwing clan. During these final years, of course, the Isaac clan faced the most brutal violence, but it should still be contextualized within this wider campaign. And before this, the Isaac clan were quite wealthy clan among some of the richest traders in the north. But I think the most important thing to point out is that just because people create the state out of oppression doesn't mean that they don't become oppressors themselves. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the regions that is part of Somaliland, the Awal region, is hugely oppressed by the Somaliland government, and constantly opposes to be part of Somaliland, and are treated as a second-tier citizen. So, yes, so the Isaac clan have been historically oppressed. So are other clans in Somalia, but that doesn't give them a legitimate reason to oppress other groups of people.
Absolutely. And I mean, those of us who study political violence as well, we know that this is a cycle that is somewhat repetitive, actually, is that people who are oppressed then go on to oppress others. And I think the big challenge in trying to bring justice in a transformative way is to kind of break that cycle. You know,
Yes,
the
yeah,
case of
that's
Israel, for example, we acknowledge they experienced a genocide in Europe. They
yeah,
experienced the Holocaust.
yes.
But that doesn't justify, creating, this settler colonial state in the land of Palestine. Um, not that these are completely comparable situations, but in terms of the cycle of violence, it is something that's, interesting to observe.
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah.
Kind of moving on to really getting into the meat of this story. So Israel recognized Somaliland relatively recently, became the first state, as far as I can recall, to recognize Somaliland as an independent state since Somaliland's unilateral declaration in 1991. But now as well, in addition to that, Khadr Hussein Abdi, who's quoted recently, a minister in Somaliland's presidency, says, "Our friends, if it's Israel or the United States, explore the potential of minerals that we have, particularly the rare earth and strategic minerals, which we know are becoming very important to us." As we know, President Trump has made it very clear that he will only really intervene in a situation if the US can benefit in some sort of transactional way. In the DRC peace process, we've seen that it's largely been premised on the fact that he wants access for the US to the DRC's rare earth minerals. And we had someone on just the other day talk about, the problems within that peace process because it doesn't respect, the fact that these minerals belong to the people of those regions. So why is Khadr Hussein Abdi effectively asking to be exploited in this way?
Well, I guess there are like several reasons. Like one of the main reasons is that to asking to be exploited in this way means like in exchange for recognition. And I think a lot of the parliamentarian within Somaliland who are advocating for recognition, especially from Western states, would basically sell out any part of Somaliland. We saw this happening with the UAE, which when they gave the port of Bosasa to the UAE, and which the UAE used to transport weapons to Sudan. To continue the war and the genocide in Sudan. So one of the reasons why he's asking for this is purely out of self-interest, and I don't think it has anything to do with the care with the care for the people of Somaliland. For example, like the Heritage Foundation project, like released a mandate for leadership in 2023. Like in that document, they outline the main goals of the United States Department, which is one of the main interests in Africa, is to counter Chinese influence on the continent, which includes the recognition of Somaliland. And he says, for example, quote, the recognition of Somaliland statehood as a hedge against the US deteriorating position in Djibouti and a focus on supporting American companies involved in industries important to the US national interest or that could have a competitive advantage in Africa. So, and another important aspect of this is that the natural resources that have already been taken from Somaliland. The UK oil company, Genel Energy, has been drilling oil in Somaliland. Declassified UK wrote an article in 2023 saying that oil drilling notoriously uses a large quantities of water, and Genel is aware that throughout 2022, areas of Somaliland were subject to drought conditions, which were subsequently identified as risk of famine. So basically, this is kind of is beneficial for the oil companies because they get to take the national resources for nothing, and Somaliland gets tiny crumbs in exchange for giving away their natural resources. For example, the company claims that it spent over $500,000 on drought relief, distributing water in 99 villages. Like, of course, Somalia as a whole, the Horn of Africa as a whole, is facing huge drought. So they're using this as a pretext to basically take away the national resources, which eventually it would happen at some point, probably this year. The US will use as a way to recognize Somaliland as an autonomous state.
Thank you so much, Asha. And I think there's still so much more that we could discuss about this. It probably requires, an entire program in and of itself to unpack, because it's a very underreported but still incredibly crucial situation to discuss, especially given, Somalia's really important location right there, at well, they call, the Strait Bab el-Mandeb. It's literally the door of the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Asha, for joining us. Asha Ali is a cultural producer, curator, and researcher from Somalia, based in Exeter. It was a privilege to have you. Inshallah, you will have a very good day. May Allah accept your fast, and Jum'ah Mubarak. Thank you, Asha.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Wonderful. It's been a pleasure. Dear listeners, we'll be back with you after this short break.